Hi everyone, Rich Crescenti here with another in our series of videos making music with Melodyne, and today is part 3 of our series of getting sounds to sit within a mix. Now in part 1 of this series, we utilized some techniques that could be done on Melodyne Assistant or Melodyne Editor, and in part 2 of this series, we utilized some techniques that required Melodyne Studio, the flagship version, and today's video is going to be more of that. We're going to be focusing on Melodyne Studio, specifically the sound editor portion. Another note about today's video is it's going to be a lot about some subtle changes to a mix, and so I would really recommend using good monitors or good headphones to understand the differences that we're talking about today. Now, looking at our sound editor, you see the sound editor window is at the bottom right here. If you want to access it, it's just these black bars right here, right? You can turn that sound editor window on and off right there, which is really just the viewing of the sound editor window. You're not really turning it on and off. It's just whether or not you want to view the sound editor. Okay. So today's song is Jet Lag by Colatura, one of my favorite bands out of Brooklyn. We used this on the last video as well. Let's give this song a listen. And what we're going to be focusing on today is a lot the acoustic guitar, which is in the left channel, and a little bit the synths in the background and the bass as well. So let's listen to the whole mix first. Here we go. All right, and let's just focus for a minute on the acoustic guitar, just so we know what that sounds like on its own. That's going to be the first thing we're listening to today. Just a standard sort of strummed acoustic guitar. It's doing what the other guitars are doing as well. So we're going to talk about some ways to get that to fit and make some room for the other guitars as well. Now, as we mentioned before, there are a lot of tools that we use to get sounds to sit within a mix. We can use EQs, we can use compressors, limiters, gates, reverbs, delays. Of course, we're still going to all use all of those tools all the time. I'm not suggesting that Melodyne replace those. However, Melodyne can help those out. It sounds different than those tools, and sometimes it can be used to get you that last little 10 or 20% that the traditional processing wouldn't get you. And on top of that, Melodyne sounds different than those other tools, and it can do things that those other tools can't. So understanding how and when to use each one of them is going to be paramount, and I'm going to show you some very cool techniques today that will help you understand how to use Melodyne to make these things fit better within a mix. All right. So let's come down and look at this window right here. Now in the previous video, in video number 2, which you can find a link for below, I focused on these two sliders right here. This is the emphasis slider and our dynamic slider. This is completely separate from the harmonics, which is what we're going to be focusing on today. These three harmonics are different. And one of the reasons that I want to point this out, right, with the emphasis and the dynamics, if you alter those, the level may be off afterwards, and you might have to use this makeup gain at the end right here. Now, this makeup gain is always available for you, but you may have to use this with these sliders right here. Whereas with the harmonics and with our EQ slider as well, these 4 tabs have automatic gain compensation, which is very cool for getting things to balance within a mix, because as I change the harmonic balance, the overall output level is adjusted at the end to stay the same. So oftentimes one of the first things that I'll be doing is using this to get some of the broader tonal balancing going, and then I might use some other tools later on to do some finer processing. Okay, so let's look at these, right? We've got our low tab, we've got our harmonics, we've got our high tab right here. I want to focus on the harmonics first, and let's talk about what this is, right? When you look at this right here, you'll see all these sliders. This looks like a graphic EQ. But it's not a graphic EQ. What each one of these sliders really represents is the fundamental first, which is the lowest fundamental frequency in any one of these notes. Where you see that number 1, this is the slider for your fundamental. So for example, this C sharp right here, C sharp number 3, in this note right here, if we listen to this, that fundamental frequency is 138.59. Whereas in this G sharp, the fundamental frequency is 208. So what's important that what you understand right here is when I adjust some of these, the fundamental or the harmonics above it, this does not work like an EQ. I'm not lowering a specific frequency, but rather a portion of that particular note. If I take this fundamental right here and lower it, I'm pulling 138 down in this C sharp and 208 down in this G sharp right here. Let's give this a listen, right? I'm going to put that back where it is. If we listen to this C sharp right here, then I can pull out this fundamental and we listen to it again. You can hear the low, the very, very bottom note is gone from it. If I pull this one out, we get even that second harmonic right there is gone as well, and you hear it thin out quite a bit. Okay, so I wanted to point that out to kind of show you how this works differently than EQ. And now let's take a look at how powerful this is. And the first place that we're always going to start is with this one right down here. I've covered this in other videos, but I am always a fan of this right here. This empty slider right here that you'll see has like a less than sign, this little caret right here at the bottom. This is everything that is below or not related to the lowest fundamental of this note. So while there's sometimes multiple pieces of information that are not harmonically related to the guitar, most of what this ends up being is low end rumble. Rumble from the body being shaken, rumble from the mic, rumble from the floor shaking the microphone. There's a lot of useless information in here that we can almost always get rid of. Sometimes I'll use Melodyne just for this. It doesn't mean that I don't use a low shelf on the EQ. It doesn't mean that I don't use a low cut filter. But this sounds a little different, and I think that this is very useful for only clearing out mud and never getting rid of anything that is musically germane to what we're listening to. So let's give this a listen, right? I'm going to come through, I'm going to go to my bass, and I'm going to pull this down right here. And I'm going to come over here to this Juno, this keyboard part, right? Let's just give this a listen. Okay, I'm going to pull this down here as well. I'll come to my acoustic guitar, which we already listened to, and I'm going to pull this down as well. And I'll even come to this guitar lead, which we can hear. Pretty distorted, which is why we're seeing this right here, but I still wanted to get rid of all of this right here. So we'll pull this down as well. So now we are looking at all four of these instruments with all of that information below the fundamental removed. So I'm going to start with this bypass. I'm going to bypass this, and let's just listen to this portion of the song. And then I'm going to unbypass it halfway through. And I want you to listen to how the kick drum and the bass come out clear in the mix because there's less low-end garbage interfering with them. Check this out. Now, undoubtedly right there, the low end is a little bit lighter, but what you're getting rid of is not musical information. So now I can rebalance that low end, and it's only going to be musically useful information. I love using that. All right, back to our guitar over here for a quick sec. There's a couple things that I want to point out about this that's pretty useful, right? This is understanding how these frequencies kind of overlap. Now, what makes this really useful right here is, right, let's say that this C sharp on the guitar right here, this is 138. Now this, if we look at the bass, we look at their C sharp an octave below that, so that is 69. What's great about this is if we understand this, right, looking at the bass, this means that this fundamental on this note is 69, but the second, right, the second harmonic above that is that the 132. So this gives us some very cool power right here, right? For example, if I come to the guitar and I lower that fundamental, right? That fundamental is that 132. If I lower that, we clear out a little bit of room for the bass, right? However, on the bass, this fundamental right here, the fundamental, the lowest frequency, right? Here we're dealing with this on this F sharp, that's 46. On this one right here, this is 69. So what we're really dealing with right here is about 46 to 82. So the fundamental is really going to only be dealing with that very, very bottom octave. Useful for getting it to fit in a mix, but sometimes not useful, especially like on small speakers. That doesn't do any good on small speakers. So I may boost the second fundamental to cut through on the small speakers and cut that a little bit on the acoustic guitar to make some room for the bass. Let me give you an example of that. Let me just go through these instruments and just alter their balance a little bit so I can show you how they all sort of fit within a mix better with some minor adjustments done to the harmonics right here. All right, here we go. Let's start off with the bass. Okay, I feel like I want that very, very fundamental to cut through a little more, and maybe some of this second harmonic as well. So let's give this a listen. Okay, now these ones above it right here are going to be where a lot of the guitar information is living. So I may take these two and just bring them down a little bit to make some room for the guitar. Nice. Let's go over to the guitar and make some changes here. In this one, I'm going to pull out a little bit of this fundamental to make some room for the bass. And then listen to what else had this effect. Cool, I like that. In this Juno right here, if you listen to that pad, I kind of want this to be an airy pad that sits up around the top of the mix right there. So I'm going to take these bottom two and kind of drop them out a little bit and see how this opens up some space here as well. You'll notice I wanted to reset one of these sliders right here, right? So at any time, if you want to reset a slider, you can just command click on it, like I said. And if you want fine control over that, you can option click and just very gently drag it up or down for finer control. Very useful as well. All right, so I've made some changes to all these right here. I think on this solo guitar as well, I'm going to pull down some of these fundamentals just a little bit to make just a little bit of room for stuff. And let's give this a listen. I'm going to put up all of these so we can check them out at once right here. And what I'm going to do is the exact same thing. And I just want you to listen how we've just cleared out a little space in this mix just with these harmonics. We're going to start with it bypassed, and then midway through, I will unbypass it. Here we go. I like that a lot. I feel like each one of those instruments sits in a better place in the mix right there without having to use EQ, without having phase issues, just by kind of altering their harmonic balance a little bit right there. Okay, cool. Now, you'll notice I've been focusing on the harmonics and not this low tab and this high tab right here. I want to talk about those for a minute because that is less the frequency spectrum and more about a weighting system for these harmonic sliders right here. For example, if I come over here to the low, we see a lot of the same harmonics. But what this would be doing would be affecting those harmonics in the lower notes primarily and less in the upper notes. The opposite is true for the high tab right here. In the high tab, if I adjust these, the fundamental and these harmonics, I'm affecting more of the upper notes in the spectrum and less the lower notes in the spectrum. This can be great if you've got like the bottom half of a piano is a little bit dull, but the top half is nice and sparkly the way that you want it. Or same thing on an acoustic guitar, right? Let's look at this acoustic guitar for a sec right here. Just looking at this one. And what I might want to do is on the high, I might want to get rid of a little bit of the fundamental to clear out some space and just leave it kind of sparkly. Let's check this out. I like that. I think that that is great. I feel like that's just a nice little way to give some sparkle. It clears out a little bit of space in there. Okay, couple of last small things that I want to talk about is sometimes you may want to alter more than one harmonic at a time. So Melodyne makes that really easy. You can just click and drag across multiple harmonics. And then we get two kind of different behaviors here with our cursor. Let's take a look at this. When your cursor is just above the harmonic slider, you'll see the cursor has kind of a curve to it. And that's implying that there's a curve when you pull them up or down, right? When I pull these up, there's a curve that accentuates the middle. When I pull them down, there's a curve that dips out more in the middle right there. So that's one way to work. The other way that you can do this is if you bring your cursor just below the line, you'll notice the cursor is flat right there. So when I bring these down, they all come down equally or they all go up equally as well. Two different behaviors for adjusting multiple harmonics, which gives you a lot of control over how this sound is shaped. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about today is sort of the shape of these harmonics right here, right? If we're looking at the acoustic guitar, looking at all of these, the fundamental and all of the harmonics, this gives a picture of the shape overall of the guitar across the whole song. This is more or less what it looks like. But this doesn't tell us what's going on in one exact instant. However, when you press play, you'll notice that there's a floating circle within each one of these sliders. That tells you exactly what's going on in that instant right there. Watch these sliders and take a listen. So we can see like this one's a little higher up than the overall average shows for this portion of the song. This is not necessarily all that useful when everything sounds fine, but if you're trying to find a cabinet resonance or a room resonance on a specific note, this becomes very, very useful for problem solving. I like this one a lot for that. We've covered a lot of tips today about how to get things to sit within a mix. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks.